Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine and I'm joined now by Alex Stewart.
Hey, Joe.
Seb Stafford Bloor.
Hello, Joe.
Hello, how's it going? Today we'll be talking about Leicester City's set-piece delivery and its ineffectiveness. But also we'll be talking about Spurs and, what? We'll be talking about what with Spurs, including Erik Lamela and, of course, Lloris. So that's going to be lots of fun. There'll be a return to Joe's player quotes and facts list midway through the second half. Anyway, that's all. Welcome to today's episode. And I will leave you in the warm hands and the cool embrace of Seb Stafford Bloor and old man Alex Stewart. Let's just begin with Spurs. I sort of trailed this in the last episode by describing them as a team that make me feel like being in a long-term relationship. Do other couples do this? What's happening? I have no perspective. And I think we should pick up from that point because I was reading Jack Pitt-Brooks, and I think Mark Carey might have been involved too, or one of the data chaps from The Athletic, great team, wrote this piece a week or two ago talking about this very thing. How do you identify a Mourinho Spurs? What actually is it? How good is it? And there's a couple of notes I've taken from this piece. The first is probably widely known, right? Or at least even if you didn't know the specific stat, you probably could have guessed that 50% of Tottenham's chances have been created by Son and Kane. Now, that could be a good thing, or that could be a bad thing. We'll come back to that. Also, Spurs have been leading in games for the second longest of all clubs in the Premier League after Manchester City, which sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? But then we read the final one, which is that Spurs have turned wins into draws in the last 16 minutes of 5 games from 22. And those teams include Newcastle, West Ham, Palace, Wolves, and Fulham. They would be 10 points better off if they hadn't thrown away leads in those games. So whilst we're going to talk about them in today's episode as they relate to losing 3-0 to Manchester City, this is perhaps not actually necessarily the main problem. And of course, also, if you're a subscriber to The Athletic, you will have seen Monday morning David Ornstein discussing Mourinho's contract. David Ornstein there just letting everybody know that Mourinho signed till the summer of 2023, and there's no break clause. And as we know from Mourinho's past, he's expensive to get rid of. So, Seb, with all of that in mind, poor Seb, should Spurs continue with Mourinho?
God, what a way to start a week. I mean, we're recording this on Monday morning. For everybody's perspective, that's the first thing that's greeted me in my working week is the news of Jose Mourinho being pretty much unsackable for the foreseeable future.
Yep.
It's a tough pill to swallow. It's very difficult, Joe, because I think one of the defenses of Mourinho, or at least one of the rationales going forward, is that if he were to be endowed with maybe 4 or 5 new players, specifically a couple of centre-backs, probably another midfielder, maybe even another goalkeeper at a cost of, I don't know, £250 million, £300 million, something like that, then he would no doubt improve this side. But I think the broader and more important question is whether, if you have those resources available at Tottenham, whether Jose Mourinho is the right person to give them to. Because I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that they are much worse than they were now at the beginning of Mourinho's reign. I think the last couple of weeks, taking all the issues about style and the prioritization of defending, and you mentioned that statistic about taking a slender lead and then collapsing back into their own half and inviting lots of crosses and free kicks and corners from which they inevitably concede. Forget all of that. What's really concerning is just how vulnerable pretty much every player in his first 11 now looks. One of Mourinho's common refrains is to talk about individual mistakes after disappointing defeats. He did it again after Man City. He did it after the Liverpool game, and he's not wrong. There are a lot of mistakes being made. At the same time, however, if it's a couple of error-prone players, then you kind of just drop them, don't you? When it's a core of error-prone players who are now looking as bereft of confidence as they have at any other point of their career, I think then you can't you can't distance yourself from that as a manager. It's a really weird thing, this idea that if individual mistakes are happening within a team, then that is something completely beyond the control of a head coach. That seems a very strange mentality for me, that players playing badly is not something that falls under the job description of Jose Mourinho. I please jump in if you guys disagree, but
No, I don't disagree. But I want to take the point to Alex too, because I think I've noticed this as well. He brings this up a lot. And, I suppose the idea is to say, well, the system's working, it's just the individual errors leading to goals. Presumably, Alex, errors happen in football games, and coaches have to accept that they are going to happen. You very rarely have a football game where at least one or two errors don't occur. Maybe they're not massive, but players aren't perfect, and as a coach, you have to expect that. So if you play, or if you're intending to play a style of football where one error leads to a goal, and a goal is as costly as it is in a low-scoring game, then presumably the coaches have to accept that before they attempt that style.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there is no player, however good they are, that isn't going to make a mistake of some description at some point, and so it comes exactly like you say. It comes down to an acceptance of that, trying to mitigate that with certain things. And obviously, I think one of the things that Mourinho has done defensively, and let's not forget that this is a season where some of those defensive performances, I'm thinking particularly the 2-0 win against Manchester City, have been absolutely lauded for how well that defensive system worked. So there is a degree to which, this is a topsy-turvy season and it's worked a lot, and now it's not working quite so well. But I think that also goes, again, like Seb says, to, if you're looking to mitigate those errors, one of the ways is to upgrade the players. And I think particularly at centre-back, I mean, Davinson Sanchez became a meme in quite extraordinary fashion. That's the sort of error that we've seen from Sanchez before, maybe not as extreme, but a misjudgment of flight, the being out-muscled despite the fact that he's significantly larger than Gundogan. These sorts of things shouldn't really happen. And I guess the problem then is, would Spurs have sufficient funds, and is Mourinho necessarily the person to spend them? I mean, the Højbjerg signing has been very successful. Reguilon, I'd argue, has been a good signing as well. But this is a squad that yes, it probably needs an overhaul. But again, I go back to this fact that after the Everton loss, first game of the season, when Tottenham were absolutely woeful and everyone got really excited about Everton as well, they then went on a run of Premier League games where they didn't lose again until mid-December.
Yeah.
And that was to Liverpool. So
let me bring this up again, because this is a really fine point, Alex. That the 5 teams that they have been leading against and dropped points in the last 16 minutes were Newcastle, Palace, Wolves, Fulham. The only one here that I think this is maybe slightly different is West Ham, who are having a fantastic season. The other teams, Wolves don't score goals. I don't score many of them. So the idea that when you're ahead, you drop points is unlikely, I suppose. Fulham, Newcastle, Palace, none of whom are having fantastic seasons. If they had, I know this isn't how football works, but let's just say, for example, that they hadn't dropped a goal in those games and they'd kept those points, they'd be 10 points better off. They would currently be point level with Manchester United and Leicester in second and third place. We expect them maybe to lose to Manchester City, a Manchester City in the current form that they're in. We expect them maybe to lose to Liverpool, right? This isn't so much the problem. So when you consider that, I mean, that seems like a very un-Mourinho-like thing to do. And then it kind of, it seems like discussions of squad overhaul are they seem a bit alarming to me, because you think, well, actually, they've got a number of very, very good players. Højbjerg has come in and has been fantastic this season, and Ndombele is showing much more of his quality and seems to be trusted by Mourinho now, which is fantastic. Obviously, you've got the Kane and Son access, and when they're playing well and that counter-attack is working, they're scintillating. They're some of the best forwards in the league. We've got Erik Lamela, who we're going to come on to talk about, and of course we're going to talk about Lloris too. But it feels like, but for a tweak here or there, I'm not trying to defend Mourinho. I think I'm trying to defend Spurs generally. It seems like that's the problem. Losing to Manchester City isn't so much a problem. The way in which they lost, which they were, and I hope Seb will agree with me, almost entirely abject and offered literally nothing to the game. That's a problem. But that they lost here isn't a problem. It's these other games that are.
I think that's fair. I mean, I'd say with the Fulham game, for example, they created significantly better chances. That's a game that on most other days they would have won. I suppose all I'm saying is that I'm being slightly cautionary in terms of the fact that this is a very topsy-turvy season and people are... There's a kind of seizing on narratives. Things ebb backwards and forwards. Spurs started the season really strongly. Quite a few of the games that they've lost are games that you would probably have expected them to lose. I think this is much more a stylistic point. It's the fact that when you play a certain style of football and it doesn't work, the perception of that is more damaging than if you were playing an exciting attacking brand of football and that didn't work. You could have the same set of results, but it's the manner of the results. It's the defensiveness, it's the caginess, it's the reliance on a couple of players that makes it feel worse than it possibly is.
No, fair enough. Seb, I'm going to ask you about Erik Lamela now, because, I love him, by the way. He made yesterday's game quite fun to watch. But we were talking with producer Adonis in the WhatsApp chat during the game. Alex and I were praising Lamela's shithousery just for entertainment value. And Adonis said, "What is he actually good at, though?" And so I thought, that's a good question for the podcast. Seb, what is Erik Lamela actually good at?
Couple of different things. I suppose with the ball, he's a very decadent player. He's someone that doesn't overly concern himself with the problems associated with giving it away. He'll happily take risks. He will dwell on the ball. He'll hold it for longer than he's supposed to. When he's running to the teeth of a defence, he's happy to try something. He's a very low percentage player in that way. Without the ball, I think it's an easier case to make. He's a very hard-working player. He is he must be absolutely horrible to play against because he's all elbows and studs, and he's got that sort of provocative attitude to him, which if I was a fan of any other club in the division, I'd hate Erik Lamela. But because he's yours, you love him because there's a spirit to him that doesn't endear him to the fan base entirely, but those who appreciate him, that's the kind of thing that they focus on. But that being said, he's always been a very divisive footballer, even before his serious hip injury, which kept him out for about a year and a half, which I'd argue he's never really been the same athlete ever since. He's very rarely been able to play more than once a week since then. Even before then, and I think this is partly because he was signed with the Gareth Bale money and because he was a left-footed player and because a lot of people who didn't know quite what he was were expecting something a little bit more Bale-like from Lamela, which he was, as anyone who watched him play for Roma will know, he was never going to be that player. So he's the thing that Tottenham fans have been arguing over for the longest period of time, with the exception of Daniel Levy and Enoch. He's contentious, but I've always liked Erik Lamela. Like if you accept him for what he is, which is that he is going to turn the ball over, he is going to try things, and he's very binary. He is going to disappoint you as much as he's going to entertain you. Then if you know where you stand with that kind of player, it's an easier relationship, I think.
Alex, he looks delighted to be a Mourinho player.
Yes, I mean, for an attacking midfielder winger, his defensive work rate is extraordinarily high. I mean, there is one interesting thing. His pressure numbers are fantastic. His interception numbers are significantly lower, which I think means there's a degree to which he rushes into those pressures without necessarily having the right sort of angles to then actually win the ball back. But in terms of how much effort he puts into it and the degree to which he's able to push defensive players back or at least give them something to worry about, that's fantastic. I look back over some of his previous players. A goal he scored, Seb will almost certainly remember this because he has an encyclopedic knowledge for these things. A goal he scored against Middlesbrough in January of 2020, which is, I mean, it's just glorious. It's a slaloming little run and then a lovely dinked finish. And he seems like a very good finisher of the ball. My concern with him under Mourinho is that he spends so much time pressuring, chasing, working hard, being a shithouse, that actually his ability to get into the box on the end of things and finish competently, which he does and has done very well in the past has been diminished. So, I feel like maybe if Lamela was freed up a little bit to be slightly more attacking, we'd see more of him, because I think he's got the skill set for that.
Alex, do you think maybe there's a little bit too much responsibility in this system? So, I mean, one of the things that occurred to me when I was watching the City game was that, and this was obviously a couple of days after Mourinho had praised Lamela and talked about him as a sort of an agent of chaos. One of the problems seems to be that in a Mourinho attacking structure, if you take the Kane-Son axis and the counter-attacking dynamic out of things, then what you're left with is individual players carrying the ball into areas where they're outnumbered and then being asked to kind of ad-lib their way to a good solution. And if you do that with Erik Lamela, you kind of tempt him along that sort of long road of indulgence, which kind of frustrates people. And it feels like there is so little happening around attacking players at Tottenham. When they cross the halfway line, unless the ball is with at Kane's feet or Son's feet, and actually, let's be honest, Son looks absolutely spent as a player at the moment, which is completely understandable because he's been run into the ground. But nothing is happening. There's no running. There's no consolidation of possession. To be honest with you, given the sort of the quality of footballers in that side, it's amazing how uncomfortable Spurs look with the ball. It's like they're a basketball team. They can either go forward or they can fall back, but they can't just hold the ball, and they can't spend any time sort of drawing the sting of a game or trying to alter the flow of momentum within it. And that Erik Lamela in that context is more likely to be a problem than an asset, I think.
I think that's right. And in fact, here's a sort of slightly weird parallel for you. Alan Saint-Maximin in early this season Newcastle, where the one opportunity that he would have during games was to get the ball relatively deep and try and carry it forwards in the absence of a great deal of support. And Lamela is a good ball carrier, there's no doubt about that. But his starting position is so deep. Really what you want with Lamela, I think, from having watched past clips where he's been successful, is you want him up with an attack where there's at least a couple of other people who are making runs that are drawing defenders away, and he seems to thrive making those little runs kind of into the space around the penalty area, carrying the ball forward slightly and then shooting or passing. He's the kind of player who worked very well in how Mauricio Pochettino constructed Spurs' attacking system, with those little interchanges, players running from deep, players finding space in between the lines. His starting position under Mourinho is too deep to be able to do that because he's got these defensive responsibilities. It's exactly the same. Again, we praise Steven Bergwijn in that Man City win for how much he acted effectively as a second right-sided wing-back. But if you've got players like that, and that's what they're doing, then of course they're not going to be up there for every single attack and linking play and finding space because they're spending all of their time in their defensive third. So,
well, this is the thing, and I think this is the crucial point actually, because I've got one of my Spurs supporting friends. His thing is hates Lamela as a starter, but thinks he's an excellent substitute. And I think that's a kind of a reflection of what you just said there, because I think when you take away, say you've got a 2-1 lead, 1-0 lead, when you bring on Lamela against a team who are committing more numbers, who are taking more risks with the ball and making themselves more liable to turn over possession, he's very good because he can start relatively high, but he can also retrieve the ball and use it quite quickly in attacking situations. Whereas if you use him from the start in a Mourinho system, which is habitually far more cautious, then you're lumbering him with things which, and let's not look beyond the athletic thing. He is not physically what he was. If you watch him run as a 21, 22-year-old versus how he moves now, he's fundamentally different. And this is a kind of a legacy of a very serious injury. And the acceleration has kind of gone, and he looks older than he is. But it just seems to be about usage with him.
He looks like you could cut glass on his cheekbones, though, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's got that sort of Italian
Greek
model
statue
vibe, hasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh,
well, anyway, speaking of another Italian model, we're going to move to a French model now. Hugo Lloris. Been a liability for some time, but never quite as bad as it is now, it doesn't seem. Of course, there were discussions about the softness of the goals that he conceded over the weekend and the softness of some of the goals that he's conceded recently. But beyond that, his kicking's always been bad. And as Seb writes here, the control he used to exert over his defenders now seems non-existent. So, obvious question is, and this is extra complicated by the fact that he's the club's captain, Seb, what happens next?
I think you have to replace him at some point. I think looking at his Spurs career as a whole, he has done an awful lot of good. But I have a little bit of a theory with goalkeepers that once they reach a certain point, and you can kind of, it's not a statistical measure. It's not like something you can really quantify. It's just a feeling you get of a point of no return. And Tottenham goalkeepers have kind of proven this in past. Like Paul Robinson reached it, became just an irretrievable situation for him. His form was so bad. Brad Friedel got old and started refusing to leave his goal line.
They're like dogs that crawl under the porch to die, aren't they?
Well, yeah. Well, you can go back to Ian Walker, who reached the same point, had a good career, and then sort of tailed off quite badly. Lloris, the number of soft goals is amazing. He still makes the occasional good save, but if you look at the Everton game, it's not just about, you hear the phrase chocolate wrist being thrown around, and there's a little bit of that. His hands have become very soft, but also if you look at things like his starting position and how, if you look at the Bernard goal, for instance, you look at, we talked about it on the last podcast about what a nice ball through it was from Gylfi Sigurdsson, and we were right. But at the same time, from a goalkeeper's perspective, that ball hangs in the air a little bit. It checks on the grass. And Lloris he settles on just adopting a position, allowing Bernard to set his feet, take his time, and score. And that's in isolation, fine. It's just a choice, and it's a bad one. And we all look at the fact that a goal's been scored, and we criticize the goalkeeper for it. Okay, but this is a trend with Lloris. He does this again and again and again and again. There's not enough aggression in his goalkeeping for my liking, and I don't know. I've spoken to David Priest about this in the past, about sort of the effect that a fragile goalkeeper can have on a defence. And if you look at the kind of mistakes that Tottenham's defence are making, mixed in with all of their other errors, I don't know whether Lloris is responsible for that, but it's certainly not benefiting them because it's absolute chaos. I mean, I watched the Everton game last night against Fulham, and I can't believe the Spurs conceded 5 goals to that team. It's just terrible.
He doesn't look happy, and I want people to be happy. How old is he now? He's in his
33,
30s.
I think.
33.
32, 33. Yeah.
Maybe he should just retire and go and do something like, he could become a painter, or maybe he could start a vineyard, or take up collecting minerals or something. But I mean, I want him to be happy, Seb.
But Joe, the pathway to that happiness for him doesn't necessarily lie in starting a vineyard. I mean, it could do. I mean, don't get me wrong, but he still probably has a few years left as a goalkeeper. I think it's his situation. I think if you're a Tottenham player who has gone through the Mauricio Pochettino era, and Lloris arrived at the club during the Andre Villas-Boas era, so he's been there a long time now, and he's seen a lot of managers.
Just to clarify, I'm going to interrupt you, and I'm going to interrupt you to say it's not that I don't think he still has a few years left in him. It's not that. It's just, do you know when you're doing something and you just bail?
Yeah, but this is
hold on. You book a concert ticket and then you don't go. But actually, that evening at home is the best evening at home you've had in a long time. Even though you've been at home every evening, that evening, it's like you're running away from something, or you're in a long-term relationship that you're unhappy in, and one day you just leave. You know what I'm saying? People just run away. Running away doesn't solve problems, but it feels amazing when you run away. What I'm advocating for is just running away. Why doesn't he just run away?
Well, I think he might do, because I think if you'd been at the club during the Mauricio Pochettino era and you'd seen the title challenges and the European Cup final, and now you're looking at what your future probably holds here, I mean,
run away.
Right. I mean, there must be that must be the impulse, because you're not thinking, oh, we're on the verge of doing something here. Maybe they are, but I mean, that wouldn't be the feeling inside the Tottenham squad. It's it is the quote unquote long painful rebuild, and this looks like a process which is probably got 2-3 years left to run. So,
and there are negative connotations linked to this, aren't there? People say things like, "Oh, rats fleeing a sinking ship," but I think, hey, if I was on a sinking ship, I'd flee. I don't mind being a rat. Rats are ultra competitive animals. They can gnaw through brick. They can squeeze through any kind of hole. Yeah, really good self-preservation. They can survive with all these diseases that would kill everything else. They're killers of the underworld. I'd happily be a rat. If the ship is sinking, you should get off the ship. You don't want to be on the ship. There'd be ghosts in the ship. You don't want to drown. All I'm saying is I want him to be happy, and I feel like if he just considered the thing about the minerals or the vineyard, maybe just get your ducks in order for 3 years down the line when you are ready. I'm sure he's doing that. I'd just be curious to know what he's doing. How do people spend their days? Anyway, we're going to be back after this break to talk about Leicester, and specifically Leicester's set pieces. All right, let's talk about Leicester's set pieces, because again, this is an observation made by producer Adonis watching Leicester-Liverpool over the weekend. Of course, they won the game. We'll come to discuss that. But the first thing that was noticed was every time there was a set piece, it was a bad set piece. And Alex looked at the stats.
I did look at the stats, yes.
Tell me the stats.
Well, so Leicester so far, according to Opta, have scored no assists or registered no assists from dead balls. They've got 2 from set plays. The distinction there is that a set play is when play is sort of still in the same phase. So they haven't necessarily got one that's directly from a header from a free kick, but when the ball's bobbling around and stuff, they scored 2. Yeah. That's right at the bottom of the league. So I had to look at how they're taking their set pieces, and kind of they've got 2 major problems. The first is that Maddison has this ability to whip a ball in quite low, but quite often he's playing it right on the margin of where the offside line is. And so it's either quite easy for the first man to head out, or it's going straight through to the goalkeeper because he's trying to angle it in towards, this is particularly from Leicester's left-hand side, to have runners bursting beyond. They also just aren't that large a side. So if they float it up, which Leicester tend not to do, when those attacking the set-piece ball are static, which again seems to be an issue, they're not really generating any momentum. So when Leicester have taken good free kicks, they've either been quite clever ones where they've sort of chipped it into a wide space and then had a player trying to pull it back, or there was one against Southampton that was quite good where actually the central defenders stood back and then ran forwards following the flight of the ball so they could attack it forwards. But for some reason they tend not to have been doing this all of that much of the time. It's static, it's predictable. The first ball is going too close to the goalkeeper, or the centre halves that are defending it are able to knock it out because Leicester's guys are so static. It just seems like they're not really thinking that much about how they can maximise those opportunities.
Yeah, it's interesting. Seb, they are third in the league, but joint points, 46 with Manchester United in second. It seems unusual to me. Maybe it's not, but it seems unusual to me that a team that is sort of that well established, in mid-season within the top 4, is also bottom of the league for stuff relating to set pieces like this. Because the other stat I think Alex didn't mention is that they are 18th in the Premier League with 3 goals from set pieces overall. And that feels like with the quality of delivery that they have, they are a small team as mentioned, but they do have players like Fofana, Evans, Soyuncu, Amati who are tall and he's certainly big enough to have an impact. That feels like a kind of odd, obviously not hugely affecting their season, but it feels like a room for improvement in that area, which could make Leicester even better.
Yeah, because especially in a season like this, Joe, because they're cheap goals, aren't they? Set piece goals. They're kind of. And with someone like Sioncho, I know he's had a few injury issues, and obviously Fofana is now out for quite a long time. But you just think that at the very least, even if those players aren't scoring goals, you can probably use them to do something at a set piece situation. You've got Vardy, who's obviously a very instinctive player and can cause difficulties around goalkeeper. Iheanacho scored a very nice, not quite set piece header, but set piece like header against Brighton in the FA Cup last week. And you just think there's opportunities there. You have the delivery and you have the utilities to mine some goals out of this area, and yet they don't seem to do it. It's strange, and you just wonder also what Leicester could be achieving were they to add that to their game. I think that's the important thing here.
That's the exciting thing.
The problem is that certainly in the last few games, Leicester seem to be trying to take free kicks in the same way that they try and create other goals, which is by having clever little movements that get ahead of defenders. And so these low whipped crosses from set pieces that are bending in towards the goalkeeper so they can play right on the edge of the line to maximise the ability of people like Vardy and Barnes to make those little runs and get fractionally ahead. But that's a very low percentage way of taking a set piece, because as it's bending towards the goalkeeper, if the goalkeeper's proactive, they can come out and gather it. You have to make sure that you are paying attention to where the line is, particularly in the VAR era. It seems like if they went back to a kind of more straightforward style of having their larger players making runs from deep and attacking the ball in the direction of the goal rather than sort of standing there and waiting for it to come to them, they'd have more joy. It's almost like they're trying to be a bit too clever and score from set pieces the way they look to score from open play, and it's not working. I mean, the good teams from set piece perspective this season, West Ham, Everton, Southampton, although over half of those are just direct from Ward-Prowse, and Wolves and Villa, and they're all teams with good set piece delivery, but also with tall players that aggressively attack the ball. And Leicester aren't aggressively attacking the ball in that way.
No. Okay, well, speaking of aggressive attacking, it's time for Joe's player quotes and facts list. It's Joe's quotes and facts database. Yes, that's right. You've joined us in the cavern, the database. What did I call it?
You call it a list, which really understands
Joe's player quotes and facts database. Yeah, Seb, if you were a better person who understood funny things better, you'd know that I'm deliberately calling it something different than the jingle every time, so that would be a funny conflict. But you have actually just stepped in and smashed that joke to pieces there. So thanks for that. No retort. There we go. The quiet, unfunny man. That's what we'll call you, Seb. It's Joe's Quotes and Facts database. Kasper Schmeichel is a goalkeeper who plays for Leicester City. Now, fact about Kasper Schmeichel, you all ready for the fact? Everyone knows about his dad, but did you know that his granddad was a well-known pianist in Denmark, Tolek Schmeichel?
No, I didn't.
Nobody knew that.
Can I just ask, given that the first time you did this was with Arsenal and you were working through sequentially by position, why have you jumped to Leicester?
Because we were going to talk about Leicester, and and I haven't finished anything else. I just remembered about 10 minutes before that I hadn't done this, so I needed to do it, and I knew we were going to talk about Leicester as a dead cert. So I figured I'd just do just two. I mean,
hey,
players
it's your section, isn't it? So
yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, it feels at the moment not like it is, because first I've had jip from Seb, and now I'm getting jip from you.
No.
Adonis, do you want to drop in and jip me?
I'm just asking questions. Am I not allowed?
Okay. And your question was, tell me a fact and quote about Danny Ward, the second goalkeeper.
Exactly that, yes.
That's nice. Okay. Well, Danny Ward, here's a fact about Danny Ward. He's only made 2 appearances for all of his parent clubs, and that was Wrexham, Liverpool, and Leicester, and both of those were for Liverpool.
Yes. I mean, I knew that he had made a couple of appearances for Liverpool. Is he a Welsh international?
I think so, yeah. I mean, he's played a lot on loan, and he had a successful campaign with Huddersfield, I believe, but for his parent clubs, just the 2.
Yeah.
Which is a kind of odd thing, isn't it? It's a different life, the goalkeepers. It really is. But anyway, a quote from Danny Ward says, love it, the boyo. Go and show everyone what you're about, my bro. At Ash Taylor. Look after the codfather for me, big dog.
Who's the Codfather?
I don't know.
Wow. What was what was Kasper Schmeichel's quote?
Oh, yeah,
Quotation.
I didn't do his Kasper Schmeichel quote. I didn't do Kasper Schmeichel's quotation. Here's Kasper Schmeichel's quotation. Your face when you get asked about your dad for the 4th time in a row at a World Cup press conference. I think there was a picture attached to that Instagram quote, but, I'll leave you to imagine. I mean, put it this way. He's not making a massive smiley face with 2 thumbs up. But love it the boyo. What can you do? That's Kasper Schmeichel and Danny Ward. Thanks to both of them for their participation. And we'll be back to Joe's player quotes and lists facts next week, or on actually later this week, when
Literally
I've remembered
can't
to do more of them. It's Joe's Quotes and Facts database. So that's nice, isn't it?
So exciting.
Let's return to the real world now. We've got a short period left, and I'm keen to just visit Brendan Rodgers just for a moment. I know he's not in the pod plan gang. I know he's not there. And hands up if anyone wants to take this, but it feels like the Brendan Rodgers, the big dad, the cool dad, the daddy-o might be ready for, not now, obviously. We don't want to take him away from Leicester City. I'm just saying, is there a big club out there that's going to take a bit of a gamble on Daddy-O?
Aren't Leicester big? Well, no, I mean,
yeah, Leicester are big. Yeah,
I suppose.
I'm not saying they're not big. I'm just saying like a club that is distinct from Leicester on its on a financial basis, for example.
I mean, but isn't that an interesting question? Like Leicester are playing extremely well. They've been consistently towards the top end of the division for the last number of seasons. They're more consistently there than some of the other quote-unquote Big 6, Big 7 clubs.
Yeah.
They've won the Premier League more recently than most of those. Like, I don't
Which
know.
makes it an interesting question because the list of clubs that you might leave Leicester to go to presumably is now tiny.
Increasingly small. One of which he's already been at as well with Liverpool.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, I think, like, look at the tactical change that he made. I think Michael Cox wrote an article about it against Liverpool in the second half. Like, that was good, clever tactical management. He's getting a lot from younger players. Obviously, Leicester have got a good recruitment set up in the background. Most of their signings have paid off, and the ones that even have been a bit questionable is largely down to injury rather than anything else. So yeah, he probably is, but I wonder if there's something about Leicester's position, the dynamic there, the fact that there isn't the pressure to bring in huge players on big wages for big fees and stuff is actually suits him better, and it might be the place where he can do the most damage.
Seb, by the way, I just noticed that you actually left the room when I was chastising you. You went really quiet when I was mocking you for interrupting me, and I felt bad. But it turns out you actually left the room.
I left. I walked out. I not only left the room, I left the flat because we're moving house, and we had an issue with DHL with some of our boxes, so I had to.
Did you hear me call you the quiet, unfunny man?
No, but
no. Okay, well, I did do that.
No, okay.
Now you know.
Now I know.
Go on, finish what you were going to say. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think Brendan Rodgers is exactly where he should be, because I think if you were for instance, a Liverpool-sized club, then you would still have reservations about what happened last time he was there and how his personality responds to that kind of scrutiny and that kind of spotlight. At Leicester, I think he benefits from obviously working with a particular type of player, but also working in a particular type of environment. There's something about Brendan Rodgers which I'm not sure what the right way is to describe it, but he becomes his own enemy sometimes, and he can get a little bit carried away. And I know some of these things are outdated, and he's toned down the more outlandish parts of his personality, but it's
the stepdad thing.
Yeah, the kind of the Raheem Sterling moment from the being Liverpool. Also, the way he carries himself in interviews. He's learned some lessons, and he's obviously I think he's been chastened by some of the criticism, and people had made fun of him quite No, people were quite cruel at times, and the David Brent stuff was a little bit unfair. But I think he's responded to it. But I think people would still have reservations about putting him back in that position until he won something outside of Scotland, I think.
Did you ever watch Grandma's House? The Simon Amstell sitcom? Only had 2 series on BBC. No. Well, Glenn from The Thick of It?
I do. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Glenn plays the stepdad in that, or like the mum's boyfriend in that, and he is the best mum's boyfriend stroke stepdad character. He plays it so well. You can imagine, Glenn. He's gone Glental. Yeah. Anyway, speaking of TV, oh my God, Adam Curtis has released a new series on the BBC iPlayer. Is everyone enjoying it?
I'm still on He's Gone Glental.
He's Gone Glental. That's a line. That's a direct quote.
For some reason, whenever I think of Glenn from The Thick of It, I think of that line where somebody shouts at him because he's listening to opera and says, "It's just vowels," which is just It's
listen, as nobody watched Can't Get Out of My Head, an emotional history. Adam Curtis's 6-part extravaganza. Nobody here? Anybody here? Mm-hmm.
I feel like you're quite close to making this like a mandatory company-wide viewing experience.
Pretty sure it's going to be. And also, by the way, Tipos, it's a mandatory Tipo viewing exercise. That's right. We are not sponsored by the BBC, and in fact, probably would be encouraged not to do this. But I insist.
Adam Curtis came up I was reading an article recently about Burial, the Southwest London musician.
He loves Burial.
He absolutely loves him. Yeah.
He talks about Burial in the most hilarious way. He talks about him as if Burial's discovered some kind of new art. New way of looking at the world.
It's very interesting. But what I find interesting is that the way Burial makes music is not dissimilar to the way Adam Curtis makes film.
Yeah. I think that's why people always like things that reaffirm their own strengths, don't they? Yeah, that's why I like The Best Footballers. Anyway, do watch that. It's the best thing.
Danny Ward, who's not made a first-team appearance for any club since 2017.
Yes, it does. And love it, the boyo. That's what I'll say. Look after the Codfather, me big dog. Right, we've got to go now. We're going to talk about Arsenal, I think, probably next week, because we had a little bit on the pod plan here in case we had time, but we don't have time. So, ever so sorry, Arsenal fans, but we'll get to you and your small club, yeah? I'm just angry. I'm jonesing. I don't mean it. I'm jonesing. Martin Odegaard, we're going to talk about. That's very exciting. And Bukayo Saka too. I am actually excited about that. But for Thursday we'll do that. For now, Seb Stafford-Bloor, thank you.
Thank you, Joe Devine.
And Alex Stewart, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
To the Tipos, to the Flute Gang, to the Tifo friends out there, au revoir. We'll be back on Thursday. Goodbye.
The Athletic.